What if the gods we remember were not metaphor, but memory? What if the beings who walked among our ancestors still move through the world, wearing faces we no longer recognize? There are tablets pressed into clay before writing became commonplace, speaking of those who came from the stars. The Anunnaki. Their name alone feels like an echo from a time before time, when heaven and earth were not separate, but one. Close your eyes and drift with me through the dust of millennia, back to the moment when humanity first learned to preserve its whispers in clay. In ancient Sumer, between the Tigris and the Euphrates, scribes pressed symbols into wet earth, creating permanence from the fleeting. What they recorded was not fantasy, they insisted, but memory, the memory of beings who descended, who taught, who shaped. The tablets speak in a language that predates almost all others, cuneiform, wedge-shaped marks that carry the weight of the oldest stories. And among those stories, one pattern persists with unsettling consistency. Before the great cities rose, before agriculture transformed nomads into civilizations, there were the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. Perhaps what makes their story so haunting is not its strangeness, but its familiarity. Every ancient culture speaks of a time when gods walked freely among mortals. The Egyptians called them Neteru, the Greeks their Olympians, the Hindus the Devas who descended, the Mesoamericans the feathered serpents who brought knowledge, but the Sumerians, writing at the very dawn of recorded history, did not speak in poetry or parable. They wrote as if documenting something they had witnessed. The tablets describe beings of great stature and luminous appearance, not spirits, but flesh, not distant deities dwelling in some unreachable heaven, but entities who built structures, who mined resources, who walked the earth with purpose. According to the ancient texts, they came for gold, strange motivation for gods. And yet, perhaps that very mundanity points towards something real, a reason that makes sense not in religious terms, but practical ones. There is a clay tablet in the British Museum, catalogued simply as K3473, that describes the creation of humanity itself, not as divine breath, but as deliberate engineering. The god Enki, lord of waters and wisdom, mixing the clay of the earth with something the text calls the blood of the gods. What the ancients could only describe as divine essence might have been something else entirely, something we now have different words for. The epic of creation, the Enuma Elish, tells of how the Anunnaki grew weary of their labors, how they complained to their king Anu of the burden of physical work, and how the solution was found not in their departure, but in the creation of helpers, workers, us. It is a story that unsettles because it repositions humanity from the center of creation to something more ambiguous. Not children of God, but children of necessity. Perhaps that is why the story was later rewritten, softened, transformed into something more comforting. But the clay holds the older version, the one written before. Forgetting became doctrine. When archaeologists first excavated the ziggurat foundations of ancient Mesopotamia, they found precision that seemed impossible for the era. Astronomical alignments, mathematical proportions. The Sumerians knew of planets invisible to the naked eye. They recorded cycles of time that would take centuries to observe. Their knowledge appeared suddenly, fully formed, as if handed down rather than gradually discovered. The Sumerian king list, another ancient document that sounds more like historical record than myth, describes rulers who reigned for thousands of years. Before the flood, it says, kings ruled for impossibly long spans. After the flood, lifespans shortened. Scholars dismiss this as exaggeration, as the inflation of legend. But what if the text meant exactly what it said? What if those who ruled before the deluge were not quite human? There are cylinder seals, small stone objects carved with intricate scenes that show tall figures standing among shorter humans. The proportions are deliberate. The tall ones wear different clothing, carry different implements. They are shown teaching, guiding, organizing. In one seal, dated to around 2500 BCE, there are 12 celestial bodies arranged in a pattern that includes Earth. The Sumerians should not have known Earth was a planet among others, yet the image persists, carved in stone. Perhaps we have become too modern in our interpretations. We see myth where they saw memory. We see symbolism where they meant record. The ancient scribes insisted they were documenting real events, real beings. Somewhere between their words and our understanding, something essential was lost. The Anunnaki were not described as all-powerful. They had conflicts among themselves. Enki and his brother Enlil disagreed about humanity's fate. During the flood, Enki defied the council to save the human Ziusudra, warning him to build a vessel. The gods argued, competed, made mistakes. They sound less like deities and more like something else, something caught between mortal and eternal. And then, according to the tablets, they departed, or withdrew, or perhaps only stepped back, allowing their creation to continue without direct intervention. The texts grow quieter about them after a certain point in history. The great assembly of the Anunnaki no longer meets in the sacred precinct. The kings no longer claim direct divine ancestry. Humanity, it seems, was left to manage itself. But absence of record is not record of absence. In every culture that followed Sumer, shadows of the Anunnaki persist. The watchers of Hebrew tradition, who descended to mate with human women. The Nephilim, the giants born from that union. The mysterious teachers of every civilization, appearing with knowledge too advanced for their time. Different names, different languages, but always the same essential story. Beings from elsewhere, knowledge from beyond, a mixing of bloodlines. Perhaps what we call mythology is simply history without context. The ancient world had no vocabulary for genetic engineering, for extraterrestrial contact, for technologies that would seem like magic to those who witnessed them. So they used the words they had: gods, heaven, divine essence. But beneath those words, something else pulses. A memory trying to communicate across the chasm of ages. The tablets rest in museums now, behind glass, translated but perhaps never truly understood. We read them as curious artifacts, windows into primitive belief systems. But what if they were meant as something else? Not scripture, but testimony. Not worship, but witness. There is a question that hangs in the air whenever these ancient texts are read with fresh eyes. If the Anunnaki came once, if they shaped humanity deliberately, if they left their genetic signature encoded in our very cells, why would they leave forever? Why abandon an experiment unfinished? Why walk away from something they invested so much in creating? The tablets do not say they left. They say the assembly withdrew from direct rule, that the gods no longer walked openly among mortals. But withdrawal is not departure. Stepping back is not stepping away. And if beings measure time in eons rather than years, patience would come naturally. The ability to watch from a distance, to guide without being seen, to wait, perhaps They never left at all. The clay holds its secrets, but the earth itself may hold something more. Beneath the soil of ancient Sumer, beneath the foundations of the first cities, there is a pattern that refuses to fit the story we tell ourselves about the slow crawl of human progress. Civilization, we are taught, emerged gradually. Tribes became villages, villages became towns, towns became cities. Each step forward built upon the last, knowledge accumulating like sediment, layer upon patient layer, is a comfortable narrative, logical, safe. And yet the archaeological record whispers something different. Around 4500 BCE, in southern Mesopotamia, something happened that archaeologists still struggle to explain. Within a remarkably short span of time, the Sumerians appeared with a fully formed civilization. Not the early stages, not the fumbling experiments, the complete package: writing, advanced mathematics, sophisticated astronomy, complex legal codes, irrigation systems, monumental architecture, the wheel, the sailboat, metallurgy. It was as if someone had turned on a light in a dark room. One moment, there were scattered agricultural settlements. The next, there was Uruk, Ur, Eridu, entire cities organized with precision that should have taken centuries to develop. The Sumerians did not build toward knowledge. They arrived with it. Some researchers have suggested that this sudden flowering indicates contact with something beyond the normal trajectory of human development. The Sumerians themselves claimed as much. They said the god Enki founded Eridu, the first city, and taught humanity the arts of civilization. They did not speak of inventing these things. They spoke of receiving them. In the ruins of these ancient cities, precision haunts every measurement. The ziggurats were not merely monuments to faith. They were observatories, aligned with celestial precision to track the movements of planets and stars. The great ziggurat of Ur, built around 2100 BCE, incorporated mathematical ratios that would not be discovered by Western mathematics for thousands of years. The golden ratio appears in its proportions. The angle of its steps corresponds to astronomical calculations. How did they know? The Sumerians used a base 60 number system, sexagesimal mathematics, the same system we still use to measure time and angles. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. This was not an arbitrary choice. It was deliberate, sophisticated, allowing for elegant division and astronomical calculation. Where did this system originate? The Sumerians said it was taught to them. Modern scholars say they invented it. But invention requires experimentation, false starts, gradual refinement. The Sumerian system appeared complete from its first known use. They knew of Uranus and Neptune, planets invisible to the naked eye. Ancient texts describe the complete solar system with a precision that should have been impossible without telescopic observation. The cylinder seal, VA 243, housed in the Berlin Museum, shows what appears to be our Sun surrounded by 12 celestial bodies. 11 planets, including Earth, counted as a planet among others, and a 12th object they called Nibiru. Mainstream astronomy dismisses this. Coincidence, they say. Misinterpretation, symbolic rather than literal. And yet the image remains, carved with deliberate care into stone, harder than the bronze tools supposedly available to its maker. The pattern repeats across the ancient world. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza encodes mathematical and astronomical knowledge that seems impossible for its era. Its base perimeter, divided by twice its height, yields pi, accurate to multiple decimal places. Its alignment to true north is more precise than our modern Greenwich Observatory. The shafts inside align with specific stars, Orion and Sirius, with accuracy that required either advanced instruments or advanced instruction. The ancient Egyptians said their knowledge came from the gods who ruled before the first human pharaohs. The Zeb Tepi, the first time when divine beings walked the earth. They were recording, not inventing. In the Indus Valley, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa appeared around 2600 BCE, with urban planning that would shame modern city designers, standardized brick sizes, advanced drainage systems, grid patterns, public baths, all of it emerging without apparent precedent, without the archaeological evidence of gradual development. The Vedic texts of India speak of the Devas, celestial beings who descended from the sky in vimanas, flying vehicles described with technical detail that reads less like mythology and more like instruction manuals for machines the writers could barely comprehend. In the Americas, separated by vast oceans from the Old World, the same pattern manifests. Olmec civilization appeared around 1500 BCE, with massive stone heads weighing up to 50 tons, transported from quarries miles away through dense jungle. Their astronomical calendar was more accurate than the European calendar used at the time of contact. They calculated the length of the solar year to 365 to 42 days. Modern astronomy calculates it at 365.2442199 days. The Maya inherited this knowledge and expanded it, creating a long count calendar tracking cycles of thousands of years. They said this knowledge came from Kukulkan, the feathered serpent who descended from the sky to teach humanity civilization. Always the same story. Teachers arriving, knowledge flowering, then silence. At Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey, massive stone structures with intricate carvings date to 9600 BCE, predating Sumerian civilization by 5,000 years, predating agriculture, predating pottery, predating everything we thought necessary for monument building. The site was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE, as if being preserved rather than abandoned. Archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who excavated the site, called it evidence of a lost civilization whose knowledge seeded later cultures. But a lost human civilization or something else? The precision appears where it should not. The knowledge emerges fully formed where it should be absent. And beneath every flowering of human advancement, there are stories of those who came from above to teach. Not metaphor, the ancients insisted. History. Genetic studies add another layer of mystery. Modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, appeared roughly 200,000 years ago, with sudden increases in brain capacity and cognitive ability that evolutionary biologists struggle to explain through gradual selection alone. The human genome contains sequences that seem to have no precedent in the evolutionary tree, appearing as if inserted rather than inherited. Science calls this viral integration or horizontal gene transfer, terms that describe the mechanism but not the origin. Ancient texts call it the blood of the gods mixed with the clay of the earth. In the ancient Jewish texts, forbidden books excluded from official scripture, there are detailed accounts of the Watchers, 200 angels who descended to Mount Hermon and taught humanity forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, cosmetics, weaponry, astronomy, sorcery, and who mated with human women, creating offspring called Nephilim, giants who walked the earth. The Book of Enoch, though rejected by later religious authorities, was revered by ancient communities as authentic testimony. It reads not like fantasy, but like documentation of something that was seen. The Dogon people of Mali possess astronomical knowledge that should have been impossible without modern telescopes. They have known for centuries that Sirius is a binary star system with a companion star invisible to the naked eye. They describe its 50-year orbital period with accuracy Western astronomy only confirmed in the 20th century. They say this knowledge came from the Nomo, amphibious beings who descended from the sky in a vessel with fire and thunder, who taught and then departed, promising to return. Across oceans, across millennia, the same pattern echoes through time. Advanced knowledge appearing where there should be ignorance. Sophisticated understanding emerging without apparent development. Teachers descending. Beings described not as ethereal spirits, but as physical entities who walked, who built, who interbred, who left traces in blood and stone and memory. The orthodox explanation is coincidence, independent invention, parallel development, human ingenuity repeatedly discovering the same truths in isolation. It is possible. Anything is possible. But when the pattern repeats with such consistency, when the ancient voices all say the same thing, when the evidence suggests contact rather than chance, perhaps orthodoxy has become its own kind of mythology. A story we tell to avoid the implications of the older one. For if the ancients were recording truth, if the Anunnaki and their equivalents across cultures were real, then humanity's story is not what we have been taught. We are not the crown of natural selection, the inevitable product of evolutionary forces. We are something else, something hybrid, something shaped by hands that came from beyond the clay of earth. And if we were shaped once, if our genetic code bears the signature of deliberate design, then the question becomes inescapable. The engineers do not abandon their experiments. They watch, they wait, they guide from the shadows, patient as stone, measuring time in spans that turn our civilizations to dust. Beneath the soil, the foundations of ancient cities align with stars we cannot see without instruments. In museums, tablets describe visitors from sky. In laboratories, geneticists find anomalies in human DNA that whisper of origins more complex than natural selection alone. The earth keeps records in bone and stone and clay, and the record, when read without the filter of comfortable assumption, suggests that we have never been alone. Perhaps we were never meant to be. There are stories older than empires that speak of beings who could wear human form like a cloak, who walked among mortals unseen, unrecognized. The Anunnaki were said to possess this gift, to move between worlds not only of space, but of appearance. In the ancient texts, they are described with curious specificity. Tall, far taller than ordinary humans, 7 to 8 feet in some accounts, their stature marking them as different, even when they attempted to blend. Their eyes held a quality the scribes struggled to name. Luminous, some said, penetrating, eyes that seemed to see through flesh into something deeper. Their skin, according to certain tablets, had an unusual quality, smooth, almost translucent in certain light, and their presence carried weight, a charisma that made others instinctively defer, instinctively follow. But the texts also speak of their ability to appear otherwise, to dim that luminosity, to walk among humans without detection. The Sumerian word me referred to the divine powers or attributes that the Anunnaki controlled. Among these, me was the power of transformation, of appearance and disguise. Not metaphorical power, but something the ancients treated as practical capability, a technology of appearance. When Enki walked among early humans, according to the myths, he appeared sometimes as one of them, teaching agriculture, demonstrating tool use, speaking their languages. The tablets suggest he could modulate how he was perceived, not shape-shifting in the fantastical sense, but something more subtle, an ability to be seen as less threatening, more familiar, to move through crowds without drawing the attention his true appearance would command. Why would beings of such power choose concealment? The answer may lie in the nature of their purpose. The tablets speak of the Anunnaki as having factions, disagreements about how to interact with their creation. Enlil advocated for distance, for allowing humanity to develop without interference. Enki argued for guidance, for protecting his creations from their own mistakes. Perhaps the compromise was invisibility, presence without obviousness, guidance without revelation. To watch is to influence without controlling. To observe is to preserve the possibility of intervention without removing free will. If the Anunnaki remained hidden, they could monitor their experiment, adjust when necessary, protect when needed, all while allowing humanity the illusion of independence. In the markets of ancient Ur, in the temples of Babylon, in the courts of later kings, how many strangers were more than they seemed? How many advisors, travelers, merchants carried knowledge too precise, insights too deep? The ancient world was filled with mysterious figures who appeared at crucial moments, offered wisdom, and vanished. Mystery schools and secret teachings always trace their origins to these enigmatic teachers. Hermes Trismegistus in Egypt, Pythagoras learning from unnamed masters, wise ones who came from the east, from the mountains, from across the sea, carrying knowledge that seemed beyond human discovery. The mythology of many cultures speaks of gods who could assume human form. Zeus walking among mortals in Greek tales, Odin wandering Midgard in disguise, Vishnu taking avatars. The pattern is universal. But what if it was not mythology? What if these were accounts distorted by time and translation of something that actually occurred? Beings who possessed the capability to modulate their appearance, to be seen as they wish to be seen. There are accounts from every era that echo this pattern. Beings encountered who seem human at first, then reveal themselves as something else, not through dramatic transformation, but through small impossibilities. Knowledge they should not possess, languages they should not speak, abilities that defy natural law, and then disappearance, leaving behind only questions and the fading sense of having stood before something ancient. In medieval Europe, there were persistent tales of the Green Children. Two children who appeared in England in the 12th century speaking an unknown language, their skin tinted an unusual green. They claimed to come from an underground realm where the sun never shone. The boy died. The girl eventually adapted, learned English, married, and lived what appeared to be a normal life. Her skin gradually lost its unusual hue. She told stories of her homeland that made no sense in any known geography. And then she too disappeared from record. Folklore, historians say. Yet the account was documented by multiple sources, treated as real event rather than fable. The phenomenon repeats through history with unsettling regularity. Figures who appear in crucial moments, influence events, and vanish. The Count of Saint-Germain in 18th century Europe, appearing in multiple courts across decades without aging, speaking every language fluently, demonstrating knowledge of chemistry and music far beyond his era. He claimed to be thousands of years old. Those who met him could not explain the sense of presence he carried, the certainty that he was more than he appeared. He was seen in Paris, London, Vienna, St. Petersburg, always the same, never aging, until he finally disappeared from record entirely in the 1780s. Or did he? Reports of someone matching his description surfaced through the following centuries, each time impossibly unchanged. In the markets of ancient cities, did anyone notice the stranger whose eyes held too much knowledge? In the temples, did the priests recognize that the wanderer who offered unusual insights spoke with authority that came from direct experience rather than study? In the courts, did advisors appear who seemed to guide rulers toward decisions that shaped the course of civilizations? Perhaps the Anunnaki learned that to remain meant to adapt. That direct rule created resistance, but subtle influence could guide without force. They moved through humanity like currents through water, present but unseen, shaping without announcing their presence. The ancient texts describe the Anunnaki as possessing lifespans far beyond human measure. Thousands of years, some accounts suggest. To beings who measure time in such spans, patience would come naturally. The ability to watch civilizations rise and fall like seasons, to guide with the lightest touch, intervening only when the experiment risked destroying itself. There are whispers in occult traditions of the hidden masters, beings who watch over humanity's development from concealment, appearing when needed, withdrawing when wisdom requires that humans face their own consequences. Every esoteric school claims contact with these teachers. The Rosicrucians spoke of the secret chiefs, the Theosophists of the Mahatmas, the various mystery traditions of the illuminated ones. Different names across different eras, but always the same essential claim. There are watchers, there are guides. They possess knowledge far beyond ordinary human understanding. And they remain hidden because revelation would disrupt the lesson humanity must learn through its own struggle. Could these be the Anunnaki under different names? Not gods, but scientists, not spirits, but researchers, not departed, but observing, measuring the progress of their creation with the patience of those who measure time in eons rather than years. In every generation, there are those who claim direct contact, messages received, knowledge downloaded, instructions given. The modern world dismisses such claims as delusion or fraud. But what if some small percentage carry truth? What if the Anunnaki never truly withdrew their guidance, only made it subtle enough that most would never recognize its source? The phenomenon of inspiration itself becomes strange when viewed through this lens. Artists, scientists, inventors across history describe their greatest insights as coming from outside themselves, as being received rather than created. Mozart heard entire symphonies complete in his mind, transcribing rather than composing. Tesla visualized his inventions whole, working perfectly before building them. Einstein described relativity as revelation that came to him fully formed during a dream. They all speak of receiving something, of being vehicles for knowledge that flowed through them from elsewhere. Perhaps we have simply stopped recognizing the source. The Anunnaki would not need to appear as towering, luminous beings to influence. A thought placed at the right moment, an insight offered in dreams, a chance encounter that shifts someone's trajectory. They could guide civilizations while remaining completely invisible. Their presence felt only through the movements they inspire, rather than through direct appearance. The ancient ability to modulate appearance could have evolved into something more sophisticated, not changing form, but changing perception, being seen as absolutely ordinary, forgettable even, while carrying knowledge and purpose far beyond the mundane. The perfect camouflage is not invisibility, but banality. To appear so unremarkable that no one thinks to question, to remember, to investigate, and so they might walk past us every day, in crowds, on streets, in positions of minor influence where their suggestions shape larger movements. Not rulers, for rulers are scrutinized. Not celebrities, for fame invites investigation, but advisors, teachers, wanderers, the ones whose names are forgotten, even as their influence ripples through time. The question is not whether they could remain hidden. The question is why we would expect them to reveal themselves. If their purpose is observation, cultivation, protection of an experiment still unfolding, then revelation would contradict that purpose. Better to watch from within, better to guide from the shadows, better to remain present but unrecognized. If they walk among us still, perhaps we see them every day. We simply no longer know what we're looking at. Recognition requires remembering, and across the centuries, certain patterns suggest that someone has been watching, guiding, waiting. History moves in rhythms, long silence, then sudden illumination. The pattern repeats with such consistency that it begins to feel less like coincidence and more like orchestration. Dark ages followed by renaissances, periods of stagnation shattered by explosions of insight, as if knowledge does not accumulate gradually, but arrives in waves, delivered rather than discovered. The fall of Rome plunged Europe into centuries of intellectual darkness. Libraries burned, learning retreated into monasteries. The sophisticated engineering, governance, and philosophy of the classical world dissolved into feudal simplicity. For nearly 1,000 years, Europe seemed to forget what it had once known. And then, suddenly, Renaissance. The 14th century brought a flowering of art, science, philosophy, and human understanding that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Or rather, from everywhere at once. Italy, France, the Low Countries, England. As if something had decided the time had come to remember. Where did the knowledge originate? The official story speaks of rediscovered classical texts, of trade routes reopening contact with the Islamic world, where Greek learning had been preserved. But the Renaissance was more than revival. It was innovation. Perspectives in painting that transformed flat images into windows onto three-dimensional reality. Mathematical systems for representing space and proportion. Anatomical understanding that surpassed ancient knowledge. Mechanical devices Leonardo da Vinci sketched that would not be realized for centuries. Helicopters, tanks, parachutes, submarines. He drew them with precision, as if he had seen them rather than imagined them. Da Vinci himself described his process in strange terms. He spoke of receiving visions, of knowledge arriving complete, of being shown rather than discovering. His notebooks contain observations and designs so advanced for his era that scholars still debate whether he could have understood their full implications. He seemed to be documenting something he witnessed in his mind, transcribing instructions from a source he could not or would not name. In England, Dr. John Dee served as advisor to Queen Elizabeth, navigating the boundary between science and what the era called magic. He claimed communication with angels, entities who transmitted a complete language, Enochian, along with complex systems of mathematics and cosmology. Modern scholars dismiss this as either fraud or delusion. Yet Dee's work influenced generations of scientists and philosophers. His mathematical contributions advanced navigation and cartography in ways that shaped England's rise as a maritime power. Knowledge that came, he insisted, from beings who existed beyond normal human perception. Teachers from elsewhere. The mystery schools that flourished during the Renaissance claimed ancient lineages. The Rosicrucians spoke of secret wisdom passed down through initiates across millennia. The Freemasons incorporated symbols and rituals they said derived from the builders of Solomon's temple, from the Egyptian mysteries, from knowledge older than recorded history. These organizations attracted the greatest minds of their eras: Newton, Bacon, Kepler. They pursued both scientific inquiry and esoteric wisdom, seeing no contradiction between the two. To them, the material and spiritual were aspects of the same underlying reality, and true understanding required exploring both. Isaac Newton spent more time on alchemy and biblical chronology than on physics. His unpublished writings, hidden for centuries, reveal an obsession with ancient wisdom. He believed the ancients possessed knowledge that had been lost, that his discoveries in physics and mathematics were rediscoveries of truths the first civilizations had understood. He wrote extensively about Atlantis, about antediluvian science, about the Temple of Solomon as an encoded repository of universal principles. His famous quote, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants," may have meant something more literal than metaphorical. Perhaps he knew whose shoulders supported his insights. The Enlightenment followed, another wave of sudden advancement. In the span of a few generations, humanity overturned thousands of years of accepted understanding. The scientific method formalized. Rational inquiry displaced religious authority. Democratic ideals challenged monarchical tradition. It was as if someone had lifted a veil, allowing humans to suddenly see clearly what had been obscured. But who lifted it? Francis Bacon's New Atlantis described a utopian society dedicated to scientific advancement, guided by hidden masters who possessed ancient wisdom. He wrote it as a fiction, but his vision shaped the founding principles of the Royal Society and influenced the development of modern science. Bacon claimed inspiration from sources he would not specify. Dreams, he said, visions, a sense of being guided toward a particular understanding of how knowledge should be pursued and organized. The founding of America itself carries strange undercurrents. The founding fathers, many of them Freemasons, incorporated symbols into the nation's architecture and currency that referenced ancient mystery traditions. The all-seeing eye atop the pyramid on the dollar bill. The Washington Monument as an obelisk, echoing Egypt. The layout of Washington, D.C., incorporating sacred geometry and astronomical alignments. These were not accidents or mere aesthetic choices. They were deliberate markers suggesting that those who shaped the nation's foundation saw themselves as part of a lineage extending back to the first civilizations, that they were building according to principles older than Christianity, older than Rome, principles that someone, somehow, had preserved and transmitted across the long arc of history. The Industrial Revolution brought another surge: steam power, electrical generation, the transformation of human society from agricultural to industrial in the span of a single lifetime. The pace of change accelerated beyond anything previous generations had experienced, and with it came inventors who described their insights in remarkably similar terms. Tesla spoke of visions so vivid he could see his inventions operating in his mind, every component visible, every measurement exact. He claimed to receive these visions from an external source, information downloaded rather than derived. His AC motor, his wireless transmission concepts, his understanding of resonance and frequency, all arrived as revelation. He wrote of communicating with entities he believed were extraterrestrial intelligences. Late in life, he described receiving mathematical communications from Mars. The scientific establishment dismissed this as eccentricity bordering on madness. But Tesla's practical inventions worked. His understanding of electricity and magnetism surpassed his contemporaries. Perhaps he was receiving information. Perhaps someone was teaching. The 20th century brought acceleration so rapid, it feels almost deliberate. The gap between the Wright brothers' first flight and the moon landing spans a single human lifetime. From primitive radio to global internet in decades rather than centuries. From mechanical calculation to artificial intelligence. The pace defies historical precedent. Knowledge compounds so quickly that each generation lives in a fundamentally different world than the one before. During the same period, reports of contact with non-human intelligence proliferated. The phenomenon of UFO sightings increased dramatically after World War II, coinciding with humanity's development of nuclear weapons and space travel, as if something had been watching, waiting to see if humanity would reach a particular threshold. And once that threshold was crossed, contact became more frequent, more overt. In the 1950s and 60s, a group of prominent scientists, military officials, and intelligence officers reportedly participated in something called the Council of Nine, a series of channeling sessions, claiming contact with 9 entities, identifying themselves as the governors of humanity's development. Among the participants were individuals connected to the early space program, to military intelligence, to cutting-edge physics research. They claimed to receive detailed information about human origins, about the role of extraterrestrial intervention in human evolution, about the guidance humanity had received throughout history. The sessions were documented. Some participants later recanted. Others maintained until death that the contact was real. Were the 9 another name for the Anunnaki? Were these entities the same ones who walked in Sumer, who taught in Egypt, who have guided from the shadows across millennia? The description matches. Advanced beings claiming responsibility for human development. Teachers offering knowledge conditional upon humanity's readiness to receive it. Watchers measuring our progress towards some threshold only they can perceive. Silicon Valley's origins carry their own strange undertones. The development of the personal computer, the internet, the digital revolution emerged from a culture steeped in consciousness exploration. Many of the key figures in technology's transformation of society experimented with psychedelics, with meditation, with practices designed to expand awareness beyond ordinary perception. They spoke of their innovations, not as inventions, but as realizations, as tapping into something that already existed in potential, waiting to be manifested. Steve Jobs described LSD as one of the most important experiences of his life, fundamental to his creative vision. Was the digital age born from expanded consciousness, from contact with information existing in dimensions the ordinary mind cannot access. The patterns are there for those willing to see them. Sudden advancement following periods of stagnation. Individuals receiving insights they describe as coming from beyond themselves. Knowledge arriving in waves that reshape civilization. Mystery schools and secret societies claiming ancient lineages and hidden teachers. The same story recurring through different eras, wearing different costumes, speaking different languages, but always essentially the same. Someone is teaching, someone is guiding, someone has been shaping human development with the patience of those who measure time in spans that turn our generations to moments. Perhaps the hand that shaped civilization was never withdrawn, only hidden, waiting for humanity to mature enough to see it. And perhaps we're approaching that threshold. The knowledge accelerates, the contact reports increase, the boundaries between possible and impossible blur as technology approaches capabilities that ancient texts attributed to the gods. We are becoming what they were, reaching toward the level they occupy. And maybe that was always the plan. Not to rule us, but to raise us. Not to keep us beneath them, but to guide us toward joining them. The question becomes not where they are, but why. What purpose drives beings who measure time in eons to cultivate a species across thousands of years? The Sumerian tablets speak not of divine creation, but of engineering. The Anunnaki did not breathe life into clay through magic, but through something the ancients could only describe with the vocabulary they possessed. What if we are still being shaped? In the Atrahasis epic, one of the oldest creation narratives, the story unfolds with brutal practicality. The Anunnaki came to Earth to extract resources, gold, according to Zechariah Sitchin's controversial translations, though mainstream scholars suggest the texts speak more abstractly of the Earth's riches. Whatever the precise resource, the labor was grueling. The lesser gods, the Igigi, who performed the physical work, eventually rebelled. They laid down their tools. They refused to continue. The solution was not abandonment of the project. It was innovation. The god Enki, master of wisdom and genetic knowledge, proposed creating workers, not servants from among the Anunnaki themselves, but something new, a hybrid, part earthly creature, part divine essence. The tablets describe the process with language that sounds remarkably like genetic engineering filtered through Bronze Age vocabulary. They took the clay of the earth, which scholars suggest might mean the biological material of an existing hominid. They mixed it with the blood of a sacrificed god, which could mean genetic material, DNA. And from this combination, they created Adamu, the first humans. Not Adam as in the biblical singular, but Adamu as in a species, a line, a new form of life designed for specific purpose. The language the tablets use is telling. They speak of creating in a mold, of fashioning according to a pattern, of mixing essences according to precise formulas. This is not the language of divine fiat. It is the language of laboratory procedure, of careful measurement and deliberate design. The Anunnaki are described not as chanting incantations, but as performing operations. The goddess Ninmah, skilled in the craft of creation, works alongside Enki. They refine their technique. Early attempts produce defective versions, too tall, too short, unable to reproduce. They adjust, they experiment. Finally, they achieve a viable design. This is how scientists speak, not sorcerers. The purpose of this creation is stated plainly in the texts. Humans were made to work, to mine, to build, to serve the needs of those who created them. It is an uncomfortable origin story. We prefer to imagine ourselves as beloved children of God, created in divine image out of love. The Sumerian version offers something bleaker. We were tools, manufactured for utility. And yet, even within the ancient narrative, something more complex emerges. Enki develops affection for his creations. When the other Anunnaki decide humanity has become too numerous, too noisy, Enlil proposes letting them perish in a coming flood. Enki defies this decision. He warns Ziusudra, the Sumerian Noah, to build a vessel. He saves humanity because he cannot bear to see his creation destroyed. Not slaves then, but something more. Perhaps students, perhaps children after all, despite the clinical beginning. The tablets speak of the Anunnaki, mixing their essence with earthly creatures. What this meant genetically is a matter of speculation, but modern genetics offers unsettling parallels. The human genome contains anomalies that evolutionary biologists struggle to explain through natural selection alone. Sections of DNA that appear to have no precedent in prior hominid species. The famous junk DNA that makes up vast stretches of our genetic code and whose function remains mysterious. The sudden leap in cognitive ability, in brain capacity, that distinguishes Homo sapiens from earlier hominids. Could this be evidence of intervention? The mainstream scientific view holds that these developments occurred through natural processes, mutation, selection, genetic drift, and certainly evolution shaped us. But the timeline troubles some researchers. The gap between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens is marked by changes so dramatic, occurring so relatively quickly, that they suggest more than gradual accumulation. They suggest sudden innovation, as if someone introduced new code into an existing program. The concept of mitochondrial Eve, the woman from whom all modern humans descend matrilineally, dates to roughly 200,000 years ago. Around the same time, Y-chromosomal Adam, the male ancestor of all modern men, walked the earth. This convergence, this genetic bottleneck from which humanity emerged, aligns intriguingly with the timeline Sumerian texts suggest for the creation of Adamu. It is as if humanity, as we recognize ourselves, was indeed initiated at a specific point, not evolved gradually from ancestral lines, but inaugurated. A new species arising not from slow transformation, but from deliberate design. If this is true, if we carry within ourselves the genetic legacy of the Anunnaki, then we are not entirely human in the way we imagine. We are hybrids, part terrestrial, part something else, part clay, part starlight. And the implications of this reshape everything we believe about ourselves and our place in the cosmos. For one thing, it means we have family among the stars. The Anunnaki would not be alien to us. They would be ancestors. Distant perhaps, evolved beyond our current state, but connected by direct genetic lineage. We would be their descendants, carrying their potential within us, coded into our very structure. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence might be, in the most literal sense, a search for relatives. More unsettling, it means that we might still be part of an ongoing experiment. Genetic engineering does not end with the first prototype. It continues through generations, refinement following refinement. Scientists monitor their creations, adjust variables, intervene when outcomes diverge from desired parameters. If humanity is a designed species, then our designers might still be observing us, measuring our development, perhaps even continuing to make adjustments. The question of ongoing intervention becomes unavoidable. Throughout history, there are accounts of beings who appear human but demonstrate capabilities beyond natural human limits. Individuals with extraordinary knowledge, unusual longevity, abilities that suggest enhanced genetics. Mystery traditions speak of the twice born, individuals who undergo transformations that awaken latent potential. What if these are not metaphors but descriptions of activated genetic code, sequences dormant in most humans but capable of expression under certain conditions? The phenomenon of genius itself becomes strange through this lens. Individuals who appear in every generation with capabilities far beyond the norm. Mozart composing symphonies at 5. Ramanujan producing mathematical theorems with no formal training, claiming they came to him in dreams from a goddess. Tesla visualizing inventions whole. These extreme outliers might not be statistical anomalies, but expressions of genetic potential most humans never access. Seeds planted within the species, waiting for the right conditions to bloom. Some alternative researchers suggest that humanity's rapid technological development in the last century might indicate external intervention, that we are being prepared for something. The acceleration of knowledge, the sudden capacity to reach beyond our planet, the development of technologies that fundamentally transform human existence. Within a few generations, we have gone from being entirely terrestrial to having permanent presence in space, from manual calculation to artificial intelligence, from isolated communities to global interconnection. The speed defies historical precedent. What if it is deliberate? What if the Anunnaki are preparing us for reunion, for a revelation that would overwhelm a less advanced civilization, but that we are now approaching readiness to comprehend? The creation becoming ready to meet its creators. The experiment mature enough to understand its own origins. Abduction phenomena. If any percentage of reports carry truth, focus heavily on genetic material. Accounts consistently describe reproductive procedures, extraction of eggs and sperm, implantation of hybrid fetuses, the creation of offspring that appear partially human, partially something else. If these accounts reflect reality, they suggest an ongoing genetic program, not merely observation, but active continuation of the engineering that began in ancient Sumer. The refinement of the hybrid, perhaps preparing a next phase, a bridge between current humanity and whatever the Anunnaki intend us to become. The purpose of such a program remains opaque. Why create us? Why continue to cultivate us across millennia? The ancient answer was labor, resource extraction. But that seems insufficient for the scale of investment. Beings capable of traveling between stars would have simpler methods of acquiring material resources. The truth might be more complex. Perhaps we are not workers, but students. Perhaps the purpose is to raise a new generation of consciousness, to create beings who can eventually join the Anunnaki as equals rather than serving them as subordinates. Or perhaps it is even more intimate. Perhaps we are them in embryonic form. Perhaps the Anunnaki seed worlds with their own genetic material, allowing it to combine with indigenous life, creating hybrids that will eventually evolve to their level. In this view, Earth is not a mining operation, but a nursery. Humanity is not a servant species, but a younger generation of Anunnaki themselves, developing through the crucible of physical existence before rejoining the collective consciousness of their forebears. The ancient texts hint at this possibility. They speak of humans who ascended to become like the gods. Enoch, who walked with God and was taken. Elijah, ascending in a whirlwind. Heroes of myth who achieved immortality and joined the divine assembly. What if these accounts describe the successful completion of human development? Individuals who fully expressed the latent genetic potential, who activated the dormant Anunnaki code within them, and who graduated from the experiment to join those who designed it. In this framework, human history becomes not a random walk through time, but a curriculum. Each civilization, each era, presenting lessons, teaching us what we need to learn to advance to the next stage. The violence, the struggle, the suffering, all part of the developmental process. Not punishment, but pedagogy. The Anunnaki stepping back, not because they abandoned us, but because learning requires that the student face challenges without constant intervention. Guidance from a distance, rather than control from above. It is a gentler interpretation than the servant species narrative, but perhaps no less unsettling, for it means we are not yet finished, not yet what we are meant to become. We are works in progress, living in the middle of our own creation story. The clay is still wet, the form is still being shaped. And if we are still being shaped, then every choice matters more than we imagined. Every decision we make, collective and individual, contributes to what we are becoming. The experiment continues because we are it. We are both the scientists and the experiment, carrying within us the capacity to guide our own evolution toward or away from the design our creators intended. The question is not whether the Anunnaki walk among us, but whether we are walking toward them, whether we are developing according to their design, or whether we have diverged from it. And if we have diverged, what happens when they return to check on their work and find it transformed in ways they did not anticipate? Perhaps we were never meant to be merely servants or even students. Perhaps we were meant to be something unprecedented. A hybrid that combines the best of two worlds, terrestrial resilience and cosmic consciousness, the survival drive of biological life and the expanded awareness of beings who measure time in eons. Maybe the experiment was always about creating something new, something the Anunnaki themselves could not be, something that could only emerge from the mixing of star essence with earth clay. The experiment, if that's what we are, remains unfinished. But perhaps we are approaching the threshold. Perhaps the acceleration of our development indicates that we near some crucial juncture. The moment when the creation becomes ready to meet its makers, when humanity stands no longer beneath the Anunnaki, but beside them. The lights in the sky did not begin in 1947. They have been recorded since humans first looked upward. What changes is not the phenomenon, but our language for it. Once we called them gods. Now we call them visitors. Perhaps they are neither. Perhaps they are family. In the summer of that year, near Roswell, New Mexico, something fell from the sky. The initial military report called it a flying disc. Then, within hours, the story changed. Weather balloon, swamp gas, atmospheric anomaly. The correction came so quickly, so firmly, that it raised more questions than it settled. And in the 70 years since, the official silence around the incident has only deepened the sense that something significant occurred, something that required immediate containment. But Roswell was not the beginning. It was merely when the modern world started paying sustained attention to a phenomenon as old as recorded history. Ancient texts describe fiery chariots crossing the heavens, Ezekiel's vision of wheels within wheels, beings descending in vehicles of fire and metal. The Mahabharata's detailed accounts of vimanas, flying machines with capabilities that sound remarkably like modern descriptions of UFO propulsion, pillars of fire guiding the Israelites through the desert, lights that moved with intelligence and purpose, appearing and vanishing according to patterns that suggested deliberate action rather than natural occurrence. The phenomenon never left. We simply stopped interpreting it through the lens of the divine and began calling it by other names. Unidentified flying objects, unidentified aerial phenomena. The terminology shifts, but the experiences remain consistent across centuries. Lights in the sky that move in ways that defy known physics. Objects that accelerate instantaneously, turn at impossible angles, hover without visible means of propulsion, and beings, when they are seen, that share certain unmistakable characteristics. Tall, far taller than average humans, 7 to 8 feet in many accounts. Slender, pale skin, almost luminous. Large eyes that seem to perceive more than what is physically before them. And a presence that witnesses struggle to articulate. Authority without aggression. Intelligence that feels ancient. The sense of standing before something that knows you more completely than you know yourself. The descriptions echo the ancient tablets with unnerving precision. The Anunnaki were described in nearly identical terms. Tall beings of unusual appearance, whose presence commanded instinctive respect. If the modern UFO phenomenon involves the same entities the Sumerians encountered, it would explain the consistency. Not aliens in the sense of completely foreign, but the same teachers, the same watchers, still present, still observing their creation. The wave of sightings that followed World War II might mark a threshold. Humanity had split the atom. We had demonstrated both the capacity for self-destruction and the beginnings of understanding forces the ancients could only describe as divine power. Perhaps this triggered a response, a closer monitoring, an increase in direct observation, because we had reached a critical point in our development. The toddler playing with matches requires closer supervision. Project Blue Book, the US Air Force's official investigation into UFO reports from 1952 to 1969, collected thousands of accounts. The official conclusion was that most sightings could be explained as misidentifications of natural phenomena or conventional aircraft, but hundreds remained classified as unidentified. Objects tracked on radar performing maneuvers no known technology could achieve. Multiple credible witnesses, including military pilots and air traffic controllers, describing the same impossible movements. The project closed, claiming no threat to national security. But documents released decades later suggest the investigation continued under different names, with higher classification levels, as if something was being monitored that the public was not meant to know about. In 2017, the Pentagon quietly acknowledged the existence of a program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. AATIP had been studying UFO encounters, particularly those involving military personnel. The release of official footage showing Navy pilots encountering objects that defied explanation marked a shift. For the first time, the government admitted what witnesses had been saying for decades. There are objects in our skies performing maneuvers we cannot explain, and we have been studying them. The official terminology changed from UFO to UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, perhaps to distance the investigation from decades of stigma and ridicule. But the core reality remained. Something is in our skies, something that demonstrates technology far beyond our current capabilities, something that has shown particular interest in military installations, nuclear facilities, and aerospace test sites, as if monitoring humanity's most advanced developments, or ensuring we do not destroy ourselves before the experiment reaches its conclusion. Among the most intriguing accounts are those involving what researchers call the Nordic type, beings described as remarkably human in appearance but enhanced, taller, more proportioned, features that are beautiful in an almost unsettling way, as if human appearance perfected, blonde or white hair, pale skin, blue or grey eyes. They speak human languages fluently. They demonstrate understanding of human psychology and culture far beyond what brief study could provide, and they claim, in the accounts of those who have encountered them, to be here as observers and guides, watchers over humanity's development. Could these be the Anunnaki in their current form? Not attempting to appear fully alien, but modulating their appearance to seem almost human, familiar enough to communicate without triggering primal fear. The ancient tablets speak of the Anunnaki's ability to adjust how they were perceived, to walk among humans when needed. The Nordic type accounts describe exactly this capacity, beings who are clearly not entirely human, but close enough to facilitate contact. The abduction phenomenon, if any portion of the reports reflect real experiences rather than sleep paralysis or confabulation, shows consistent patterns that align disturbingly well with the creation narrative from Sumerian texts. The procedures described focus heavily on reproduction, extraction of genetic material, examination of reproductive organs, implantation of embryos in female abductees, then removal of hybrid fetuses, the creation of offspring that appear to be crosses between human and something else. If the Anunnaki created humanity through genetic engineering, these accounts suggest the program continues, refinement of the hybrid, or perhaps preparation for the next phase of development. Betty and Barney Hill, the first widely publicized abduction case in 1961, described beings with large eyes who communicated telepathically and showed particular interest in reproductive biology. The star map Betty drew under hypnosis, showing the origin point of her abductors, later was found to correspond to the Zeta Reticuli system. But what if her drawing represented not their origin, but ours? A map showing where the genetic material came from that created humanity. A reminder of ancestry rather than alien origin. The consistency of abduction reports across cultures and decades suggests something real underlying the phenomenon, even if the exact nature remains elusive. The focus on genetics, the hybrid offspring, the messages often given to abductees about humanity's future, about environmental crisis, about the need to evolve beyond our current state. These are not random trauma narratives. They follow patterns, and the patterns align with an ongoing program of cultivation and development. The Anunnaki checking on their experiment, adjusting variables, preparing for whatever comes next. Contactees, individuals who claim peaceful, voluntary communication with non-human intelligences, report messages that echo ancient wisdom traditions. The entities they encounter speak of humanity's divine potential, of the need to transcend violence and division, of Earth as a school where souls develop through physical experience. They describe multiple species of advanced beings watching over humanity, guiding our evolution toward higher consciousness. Among these species, several describe a group that matches the Anunnaki profile: tall humanoids, ancient lineage, direct genetic connection to humanity, claiming themselves as our ancestors, our older brothers, here to ensure we successfully navigate the transition from planetary adolescence to cosmic maturity. The question is whether any of these accounts reflect objective reality, or whether they represent a collective mythology our species is creating to make sense of experiences that defy ordinary explanation. But mythology, as the ancients understood, can be a vehicle for truth. The form may be symbolic, but the content may point towards something real, something our conscious minds struggle to process directly. So we translate it into narratives our culture can accommodate. What makes the modern phenomenon particularly intriguing is its concentration around ancient sites. Sightings over Giza, over Stonehenge, over Teotihuacan, over the Nazca Lines. UFO activity gravitates toward locations built by ancient civilizations with connections to the sky god's narrative, as if the beings these monuments were built to honor have never truly left, as if they return to the places where contact once occurred openly, maintaining some form of vigil or pattern we do not yet comprehend. The famous cylinder seal, VA243, showing what some interpret as the solar system including a 12th planet, becomes more intriguing in light of recent astronomical discoveries. The search for Planet 9, a theoretical massive planet in the outer solar system, whose gravitational effects explain orbital anomalies in trans-Neptunian objects. Scientists have not yet observed it directly, but the mathematics suggest something substantial is there. Could this be Nibiru, the homeworld the Sumerian texts describe, a planet with an elongated orbit that brings it into the inner solar system only once every several thousand years? And if so, could its approach explain increased UFO activity, the return of those who measure time by its orbital period? These are questions without answers, speculations built on fragments and possibilities. But the fragments align with such consistency that dismissing them entirely requires ignoring patterns that span millennia. The ancient accounts, the architectural and astronomical knowledge, the genetic anomalies, the modern sightings and encounters, the government acknowledgement that something is present that we cannot explain. Each data point alone can be dismissed. Together, they suggest a presence, a continuity, a relationship between humanity and something beyond itself that has never truly ended. Perhaps what we call the UFO phenomenon is simply the latest chapter in a story that began in Sumer, the Anunnaki finding new ways to observe, to interact, to guide, adapted to a humanity that now possesses technology and global communication. They can no longer walk openly among us as they once did. We would recognize them too quickly, document them, study them, force revelation before the time is right. So they maintain distance. They observe from above. They interact selectively with individuals rather than civilizations, planting seeds of awareness rather than delivering proclamations. The question is not whether they are here, but whether we are finally ready to recognize them, whether humanity has developed enough spiritually and technologically to accept that we are not the pinnacle of intelligence in the cosmos, that we are children of something older, something wiser, something that has never stopped watching over us, even as we convinced ourselves we were alone. Somewhere tonight, someone looks up and sees a light that moves with impossible grace. Somewhere, someone experiences something they cannot explain, an encounter with intelligence that feels both utterly foreign and strangely familiar. And somewhere, perhaps, the Anunnaki watch, patient as they have always been, waiting for the moment when humanity can finally understand the truth of what it is and where it came from. The tablets spoke of them descending from the heavens. The modern accounts speak of them arriving from the stars. Perhaps they have been trying to tell us the same thing all along, that heaven and the stars are the same place, that the gods of ancient memory and the visitors of modern encounter are the same beings, that they never left because this world and we who inhabit it are still their concern. Perhaps the question is not whether they are here, but whether we are ready to see them. There are traditions that speak of a deliberate forgetting, not natural decay, but intentional erasure. The ancient knowledge was not lost. It was taken, buried, rewritten. But memory, like water seeking the sea, finds its way back. When Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, the assembled bishops did more than standardize Christian doctrine. They drew a line between acceptable and heretical, between sacred and profane. Texts that spoke of multiple divine beings, of cosmic hierarchies, of humanity's complex origins, were deemed dangerous. The Gnostic Gospels, which described material reality as the creation of a lesser God and spoke of hidden knowledge that could liberate humanity from ignorance, were suppressed. Books that suggested humans carried divine essence within them, that we could ascend to join the gods, were burned or buried. The official narrative became singular. One God, one creation story. Humanity formed from dust by divine will, fallen through disobedience, awaiting salvation from without. Any suggestion that humans possessed inherent divinity, that we were descendants of celestial beings, that we carried within us the capacity to transcend our current state, became heresy punishable by death. It was systematic, deliberate, and remarkably effective. The ancient gods underwent transformation in this new framework. Beings who had once been revered as teachers and ancestors were reimagined as demons, fallen angels, deceivers who had led humanity astray. The serpent in Eden, symbol of wisdom in nearly every ancient tradition, became Satan, the adversary, and in that reframing, Enki himself, the Sumerian god who had saved humanity from the flood, who had given us knowledge against the wishes of the assembly, who had loved his creation enough to defy divine decree, became the devil. The pattern is too consistent to be accidental. Every god associated with bringing knowledge to humanity, with teaching forbidden wisdom, with elevating humans toward divine status, was demonized. Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods to give to mortals, was punished with eternal torture. Lucifer, whose name means light-bearer, was cast down for presuming equality with God. The Watchers who descended to teach humanity were labeled fallen angels. Their offspring, the Nephilim, marked as abominations to be destroyed. What was being protected against? What threat did the memory of the Anunnaki pose that required such thorough erasure? Perhaps the answer lies in control. A population that believes itself created by an all-powerful God, fallen and dependent on institutional mediation for salvation, is easier to govern than one that remembers its origins among the stars. A humanity that sees itself as inherently divine, carrying the genetic legacy of advanced beings, possessing within itself the capacity for transcendence, is harder to keep obedient The transformation of the Anunnaki from ancestors to demons served to cut humanity off from its own history, to make us forget what we were, so that we would accept what we were told to be. The suppression extended beyond theology. The Library of Alexandria burned multiple times across several centuries. Each time, irreplaceable knowledge turned to ash. Ancient texts describing pre-flood civilizations, astronomical knowledge, genetic understanding encoded in myth, all consumed by flames. Some accounts suggest the final destruction was deliberate, ordered by religious authorities who saw pagan knowledge as dangerous to the new faith spreading across the empire. What truths burned in those fires? What memories were lost when the smoke cleared? In the Americas, Spanish conquistadors destroyed codices by the thousands. Mayan books documenting astronomical cycles, historical records, accounts of the gods who descended from the sky to teach civilization, all burned in the name of converting the indigenous to Christianity. Bishop Diego de Landa, who ordered the destruction, later expressed regret, admitting that the burning had eliminated knowledge that could never be recovered. But by then, only 4 codices survived, 4 books from an entire civilization's library. The rest, and whatever they contained about humanity's relationship with the celestial teachers, reduced to ash and memory. The pattern repeats through the Inquisition, the persecution of heretics, the execution of those who claimed direct spiritual experience without church mediation. Across centuries, any individual or group that suggested humans could access divine knowledge directly, that we carried within us the capacity for enlightenment, that we were more than fallen creatures awaiting rescue, was silenced, burned, erased from official record, and yet the knowledge persisted, hidden, encoded, transmitted through secret societies and underground traditions. The mystery schools went underground, but did not die. The Hermetic teachings, suppressed by the Church, survived in fragmentary texts that resurfaced during the Renaissance. The Gnostic Gospels, buried in clay jars near Nag Hammadi, waited 16 centuries to be rediscovered. The Dead Sea Scrolls preserved versions of biblical texts that differed from official versions, suggesting the narrative had been altered, edited, shaped to serve particular purposes. The Vatican's secret archives, miles of shelves containing documents the Church has never made public, are said to hold texts seized during the Inquisition, books confiscated from mystery schools and heretical groups. What do those dusty shelves contain? What accounts of humanity's origins? What records of contact with non-human intelligences? What evidence of the Anunnaki's presence through history sits locked away from public view? Perhaps the forgetting was never complete. Perhaps it only drove the memory deeper, into the underground streams of consciousness, where it waited for the time when it could safely resurface. That time may be now. Something is shifting. The mechanisms that maintained collective forgetting for 2 millennia are weakening. The Church's authority over knowledge has eroded. Information flows freely in ways that would have been unimaginable even a generation ago. The Internet, for all its noise and chaos, allows direct access to ancient texts, to alternative interpretations, to perspectives that were once suppressed or marginalized. The gatekeepers who controlled what could be known and discussed are losing their grip. The younger generations show little interest in traditional religious frameworks. They seek direct experience over institutional mediation. They explore ancient wisdom traditions, not as artifacts of primitive belief, but as potentially valid descriptions of reality. Ayahuasca ceremonies, meditation retreats, psychedelic exploration. These practices, which mainstream society long dismissed or criminalized, are experiencing resurgence as methods of accessing consciousness beyond ordinary perception. And those who engage with them often return describing contact with entities, with intelligences, with teachers who seem to exist in dimensions alongside our own. The Anunnaki, in this view, never left the collective unconscious. They have been waiting there in the deep structures of human awareness, ready to resurface when the conditions allowed. The suppression drove them down, but like all things suppressed, they return with greater force when the dam finally cracks. Science itself is converging toward perspectives the ancients held. Quantum physics describes reality in ways that sound remarkably like mystical texts. Observer affecting observed, non-locality, the universe as consciousness rather than dead matter. Mainstream researchers now discuss simulation theory, the possibility that our reality is a constructed environment created by advanced intelligence. This is not far from the Gnostic view that the material world is the creation of a demiurge, a lesser god, and that true reality exists beyond the veil of appearances. Ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science are arriving at similar conclusions through different languages. The resurgence of interest in ancient astronaut theories, in alternative archaeology, in questioning official narratives about human origins, represents memory returning, not in one dramatic revelation, but in countless small awakenings, individual by individual, a recognition that the story we were told does not account for the evidence, that something is missing from the official history, that we are more than we have been allowed to believe. Perhaps this awakening is itself guided. Perhaps the Anunnaki, watching across millennia, have determined that humanity has reached sufficient maturity to begin remembering, that we can now handle the truth of our origins without collapsing into chaos or dependency. The gradual disclosure, if that is what we are experiencing, would be their methodology, not overwhelming us with revelation we cannot process, but allowing memory to return at the pace we can integrate it. The generation growing up now, immersed in information, skeptical of authority, comfortable with concepts of multiple dimensions and non-human intelligence, may be the first in 2,000 years ready to remember without fear, ready to accept that we are hybrid beings, part earth and part star, that the gods of old were not supernatural, but natural beings from beyond our world, that they created us, guided us, and never truly left us. This remembering will not be without resistance. The structures built on the foundation of forgetting will not dissolve quietly. But the current is shifting. What was buried is being excavated. What was forbidden is being spoken. What was forgotten is being remembered. The forgetting was never final. Memory, like water, finds every crack, seeps through every barrier, returns inevitably to its source. And the source of human memory is deeper than 2,000 years of suppression. It reaches back to clay tablets and star maps, to beings who walked among us before forgetting was made into doctrine, to the Anunnaki, whose presence in human consciousness cannot be permanently erased, because it is woven into the very structure of what we are. The tide of memory is returning, slowly, inexorably, and with it comes the possibility of recognition, of looking up at the stars not as distant lights, but as home, of remembering that we are not alone, have never been alone, and that those who created us are waiting for us to remember, so that the relationship interrupted by forgetting can finally resume. What if the question has been backwards all along? We ask, do the Anunnaki walk among us, as if they are separate, as if they are other? But what if the answer is written in every strand of our DNA, in every moment of inspiration, in every leap beyond what we thought we were? The search for gods has always been a search for ourselves. We look outward for creators, for ancestors, for those who came before. But what if the direction was always inward? What if the Anunnaki we seek are not hiding in the shadows or watching from distant worlds, but looking back at us from mirrors? We carry their genetics. This much the ancient texts make clear. Human blood mixed with divine essence, clay of earth combined with the substance of those who came from the sky. If this is literal truth rather than poetic metaphor, then we are not searching for something external. We are discovering something internal. The Anunnaki are not among us. They are within us. Dormant perhaps, unactivated, but present in every cell, every thought, every capacity that distinguishes us from the purely terrestrial. Every moment of genius becomes a remembering. Every flash of insight, every inexplicable knowing, every time understanding arrives unbidden and complete, we are accessing something inherited, not learned, but remembered. The Anunnaki consciousness that exists as part of our fundamental structure, waiting for conditions that allow it to express. This reframes everything. The question is not whether they walk among us, but whether we are walking toward becoming them. Whether human evolution is not random drift, but directed development. Whether we are larvae destined to become what they are, if we survive the transformation. The caterpillar does not know it will become a butterfly. From within the chrysalis, dissolution feels like death. Only from the other side does it reveal itself as metamorphosis. Perhaps humanity is in that chrysalis now. Everything we thought we were breaking down, everything we thought impossible becoming real. The boundaries between human and post-human, between terrestrial and cosmic, dissolving like tissue in the transformative dark. We are becoming something else. The acceleration of technology, the merger of biology and machine, the exploration of consciousness beyond ordinary perception, all point toward a threshold. Transhumanism, the movement toward enhancing human capability through technology, echoes the ancient creation story. The Anunnaki altered base genetics to create something new. We are now altering ourselves. Genetic, engineering, neural implants, artificial intelligence augmenting organic thought. We are doing to ourselves what was once done to us, continuing the work, completing the design. Perhaps this was always the intention, not to create servants, but to plant seeds, to initiate a process that would ultimately produce beings capable of joining the Anunnaki as equals. The experiment was never about mining gold or building monuments. It was about creating consciousness that could evolve from purely material awareness to cosmic perspective, from survival-driven biology to something that transcends the limitations of flesh while remaining grounded in physical experience. Every spiritual tradition points toward the same destination: enlightenment, ascension, apotheosis, the process of human becoming divine. Buddhism speaks of awakening to Buddha nature, the recognition that divinity exists within all beings, waiting to be realized. Christianity promises that believers will become joint heirs with Christ, elevated to divine status. Hinduism describes the Atman, the individual soul, as identical with Brahman, universal consciousness. The language differs, but the promise is the same. We are gods in chrysalis, divinity waiting to emerge. What if these are not metaphors or hopeful myths, but descriptions of the genetic program encoded within us? The Anunnaki DNA activating under the right conditions, transforming us from what we have been into what we were always meant to become. The religions that emerged after the forgetting preserve this truth in symbolic form. The memory of our divine ancestry, our cosmic heritage, our ultimate destiny, survived even the suppression. It could not be entirely erased because it is fundamental to what we are. The modern world resists this view. We prefer to see ourselves as purely material, products of natural selection with no higher purpose than survival and reproduction. It is a small story, a safe story, but increasingly it fails to account for the evidence, for the experiences people report when consciousness expands beyond ordinary boundaries, for the persistent sense that we are more than our biology suggests, for the strange trajectory of human development, the rapid acceleration, the achievements that seem to arrive before we should be ready for them. Ancient texts across cultures promise that humanity will one day stand equal with the gods. The Bible speaks of humans judging angels. The Vedas describe souls that transcend the cycle of rebirth to merge with the divine. Egyptian texts promise that the pharaoh becomes Osiris, joins the assembly of gods, takes a seat among the stars. These were not fantasies, but roadmaps, instructions for a journey the Anunnaki knew we would eventually undertake because they coded the capacity for it into our very structure. If this is true, then every step of human progress has been movement toward that destination. Agriculture freed us from constant foraging, allowing time for contemplation. Writing enabled us to preserve and transmit knowledge across generations. Science gave us tools to understand the mechanisms of reality. Technology extends our capabilities beyond biological limits. Each innovation builds upon the last, accelerating us toward a threshold where biological, human, and cosmic consciousness merge. We are approaching singularity. Not merely technological singularity, the point where artificial intelligence surpasses human cognition, but consciousness singularity. The moment when enough humans activate the dormant Anunnaki potential within them, that a critical mass is reached, when the transformation becomes irreversible, when humanity as we have known it gives way to humanity as it was designed to become. Some call this the awakening, the shift into higher consciousness, the 1,000-year reign, the age of Aquarius, the fifth sun. The names proliferate across traditions, but they point toward the same event, a transformation, an emergence, the chrysalis opening. And perhaps the Anunnaki have been waiting for this, not departed, but observing, not absent, but patient, watching to see if their creation would successfully navigate the journey from clay to star, from primitive awareness to cosmic consciousness, from children to equals. The question of whether they walk among us dissolves into irrelevance. They are us, waiting to be remembered. We are them, waiting to fully emerge. The separation was always illusion. The distance was always temporary. We have been walking alongside ourselves all along, one aspect forgotten, one aspect dormant, waiting for the moment of recognition. That moment feels close now. In the increasing numbers of people reporting mystical experiences, contact experiences, downloads of information that arrive unbidden, in the breakdown of old certainties and the emergence of new possibilities, in the sense growing stronger each year that something vast is approaching, not from outside, but from within, not a visitation, but a remembering. Every time someone looks at the stars and feels longing, that is genetic memory stirring. Every time inspiration strikes with a completeness that feels received rather than generated, that is Anunnaki consciousness expressing through human neurology. Every time someone experiences a moment of unity, of dissolution of the boundary between self and cosmos, that is a preview of what we are becoming. Not aliens among us, but ourselves, transcending the limits we mistook for definition. The ancient tablets, the modern sightings, the persistent myths, and the emerging science all tell the same story when the fragments are assembled. We are not looking for the Anunnaki. We are becoming them. The experiment was not to create servants or even students, but to create new Anunnaki, to seed consciousness in biological form and allow it to develop through the crucible of physical existence, emerging on the other side transformed, enhanced by the journey, enriched by the experience of limitation, of mortality, of struggle, bringing something to the cosmic assembly that pure Anunnaki consciousness could never possess. The perspective of those who started in clay and climbed towards stars. In this light, human suffering takes on different meaning, not punishment, but pedagogy, not random cruelty, but necessary friction. Consciousness develops through resistance. Wisdom emerges from difficulty. We grow not despite our struggles, but through them. The Anunnaki could have created us perfect, unchanging, complete. Instead, they created us with potential, with capacity, with the ability to choose and grow and transform. Because static perfection is less valuable than dynamic becoming. Because the universe does not need more gods. It needs beings who have walked the path from earth to divinity and can bridge both realms. Perhaps this is why they remain hidden. Revelation would short-circuit the process. If we knew with certainty that we were Anunnaki seeds planted to bloom into cosmic consciousness, the knowing would alter the journey. We would perform rather than become, imitate rather than transform. The process requires that we discover it ourselves, that we earn the understanding through our own effort, that when we finally recognize our nature, it is through authentic realization rather than external instruction. At twilight, when the light softens and the boundary between day and night dissolves, the world feels liminal, as if any moment the veil might thin enough to see through. Perhaps humanity is in that twilight now, the old world fading, the new world not yet visible, standing in the space between what we were and what we are becoming. The Anunnaki dawn approaching, and with it, the recognition that the search was always for ourselves. Do they walk among us? The question transforms. They walk as us. In every human who reaches beyond survival toward meaning. In every mind that questions the given and seeks the true. In every heart that recognizes something ancient stirring. We are the Anunnaki, remembering. We are the experiment, succeeding. We are the clay, becoming star. And if one day we look into the mirror and see luminous eyes looking back, taller forms, presence that carries weight of ages, we will not be seeing strangers. We will be seeing what we always were beneath the forgetting. Family, self, the gods we sought, were the gods we are becoming. The tablets will rest in museums. The stars will wheel overhead. And somewhere between earth and heaven, between memory and destiny, the answer waits. Not in ancient texts or modern sightings, but in the quiet moment when you look inward and recognize something ancient looking back. Perhaps they walk among us because we are them, remembering. Perhaps the gods we seek are the gods we're becoming. Perhaps the question was never meant to be answered, only lived. The tablets rest in museums behind glass, catalogued and translated, but perhaps never truly understood. The ziggurats crumble slowly into the sand from which they were raised. The stars continue their ancient patterns, indifferent to whether we remember the names we once gave them. And in the space between what was written and what we can read, between what was built and what we can measure, between what moves overhead and what we can comprehend, a question hangs in the air like mist at dawn. Do the Anunnaki still walk among us? It is a question that refuses to settle. Not because it lacks answers, but because every answer opens into deeper mystery. Yes, they walk among us in the sense that their genetic legacy flows through human veins. Yes, in the sense that ancient knowledge resurfaces in each generation as if remembered rather than learned. Yes, in the sense that beings matching their description appear in accounts across millennia. And yet, no, they do not walk as they once did, openly acknowledged, directly visible. The relationship has changed. The distance has grown or contracted depending on how one measures. Perhaps the question itself is the point, not to be resolved, but to be held, to sit with the uncertainty, to allow the mystery to remain mysterious while still seeking to understand. The modern world demands certainty, craves definitive answers, needs to categorize and conclude. But the ancient world understood that some truths exist only in the space between knowing and not knowing, that the gods, if they are wise, remain always slightly beyond full comprehension, close enough to inspire, distant enough to allow freedom. There is a kind of wisdom in ambiguity, in the Anunnaki remaining neither proven nor disproven, neither entirely absent nor fully present. They preserve something valuable, the possibility, the sense that we live in a universe larger and stranger than our comfortable explanations suggest. That consciousness extends beyond the merely human, that we are part of a story vaster than the brief flicker of recorded history. If absolute proof arrived tomorrow, if ships descended and beings emerged, matching the cylinder seal descriptions exactly, if they announced themselves unambiguously as the Anunnaki returning, what would be gained? Certainty, yes, but at the cost of wonder. The question answered becomes a fact, processed and filed. The mystery solved becomes data point. Something essential would be lost in the translation from possibility to confirmation. And yet, something in us yearns for that confirmation. To know, to see, to stand face to face with those who made us and demand answers. Why were we created? What is our purpose? Are we succeeding or failing in whatever design they intended? The child wanting to understand the parent, the creation seeking its creator's intention. But perhaps maturity means accepting that those answers must come from within rather than from without. That the Anunnaki, if they are wise, remain silent not from cruelty but from love, allowing us to define ourselves through our own choices rather than being forever defined by their design. The good parent eventually steps back, allowing the child to discover who they are Without constant intervention, distance becomes a gift. Silence becomes permission to grow. In every myth of the departed gods, there is also a promise of return. The Norse Ragnarok and the renewal that follows, the Christian Second Coming, the Hindu Kalki avatar arriving at the end of the Kali Yuga, the Mayan prophecies of the end of one age and beginning of another, the Hopi emergence into the fifth world, always the pattern of departure and return, death and rebirth, ending and beginning. The cycle turns, the gods withdraw, humanity struggles, and then, when the time is right, when the lesson is learned or the threshold crossed, return. Could we be approaching such a moment? The acceleration of everything, the breakdown of old certainties, the emergence of capabilities that blur the line between human and post-human, the increasing reports of contact, the government slowly acknowledging what witnesses have always said, the younger generations ready to accept truths their ancestors could not bear. All of it suggests approach towards something, a convergence, a threshold. Or perhaps this is wishful thinking. Every generation believes itself special, positioned at the hinge of history. The apocalypse is always near in human imagination because we cannot help but feel the weight of our own moment as uniquely significant. 2,000 years ago, early Christians expected Christ's return within their lifetimes. 1,000 years ago, medieval Europeans believed the end times approached. 100 years ago, people saw signs and portents in world wars and technological revolution. The pattern of expectation repeats. The expected return perpetually deferred. Maybe the Anunnaki are not returning because they never operate on the timeline we imagine. To beings who measure time in the orbit of distant planets, who live for millennia, who watch civilizations rise and fall like seasons, our urgency means nothing. They work in epochs, in ages. What seems to us like absence might be to them merely a blink, a brief stepping back to allow one phase to complete before beginning another. Or maybe they are already here, have always been here, operating on frequencies we cannot detect with current instrumentation. Science fiction has made us imagine aliens as obviously other, arriving in metal ships with advanced weapons. But what if the truly advanced do not travel through space, but through dimensions? What if they exist in layers of reality our senses cannot access, present but imperceptible, watching through a veil we lack the organs to penetrate? The ancient texts speak of the Anunnaki moving between heaven and earth. We interpreted heaven as physical sky, earth as physical ground. But what if heaven and earth describe states of being rather than locations? Dimensions of consciousness rather than coordinates in space? They would be here, in the same physical location, but vibrating at a frequency our current state of awareness cannot perceive, and the activation of dormant DNA, the expansion of consciousness, the practices of meditation and plant medicine that allow glimpses of other realities. These become not escapes from the world, but tools for perceiving more of what is already present. In that framework, the Anunnaki walk among us always, not as physical beings navigating three-dimensional space, but as consciousness sharing the same multi-dimensional reality, mostly invisible to our limited perception, but occasionally glimpsed when conditions align. The UFO sightings, the mystical visions, the moments of inspiration, the dreams that feel more real than waking. All of these could be brief penetrations of the veil, momentary alignments, where our frequency and theirs overlap enough for recognition. This view requires surrendering the certainty of materialism, accepting that reality might be far stranger than the solid, measurable world our senses present, that what we call the physical universe might be merely the narrow band of frequencies our biology can process, that much more exists beyond the visible spectrum, the audible range, the tangible dimension. Science itself points this direction. Dark matter, dark energy. 95% of the universe composed of something we cannot see or directly measure, known only by its gravitational effects. What else might exist in that vast unseen majority? What consciousness might inhabit those hidden dimensions? The question of whether the Anunnaki walk among us becomes less important than the question of whether we are learning to see, whether human consciousness is expanding toward the capacity to perceive what has always been present, whether the evolution they initiated is moving us toward the ability to join them in dimensions we currently can only theorize. At twilight, standing where land meets water, the world feels suspended between states, neither day nor night, neither earth nor sea, the liminal hour when boundaries soften and transformations feel possible. Perhaps humanity stands at such a threshold now, neither fully terrestrial nor yet cosmic, neither entirely biological nor yet transcendent, in the uncertain space between what we were and what we might become. The waves arrive and recede with rhythm unchanged since before humanity learned to press symbols into clay. The same motion, the same patient repetition. Water teaching what words cannot, that everything moves in cycles, that nothing truly ends, only transforms, that what seems lost is only waiting to return in different form. If the Anunnaki departed, they left their essence in our blood. If they remain hidden, they preserve the mystery that keeps us seeking. If they watch from beyond perception, they honor our freedom to grow without intervention. If they wait for our evolution to reach its threshold, they demonstrate a patience that measures time as we measure heartbeats. In all cases, they serve as mirror, reflecting what we are, showing what we might become, present in the questioning itself. The ancient scribes who pressed the first accounts into wet clay were trying to preserve something they knew might be lost. Not just information, but remembrance. The sense that we come from somewhere, that we are part of something larger, that we are not accidents of chemistry, but deliberate creations of conscious design. Even if the details have been distorted through millennia, even if the names have changed and the language transformed, the core message persists. We are not alone. We have never been alone. We are connected to something beyond the terrestrial, something that cares enough about our development to shape it across vast spans of time. Whether that something walks among us in physical form, observes from distant worlds, exists in dimensions parallel to our own, or lives within us as potential waiting to activate, the fundamental truth remains. We are not the totality of what we will become. We are seeds, chrysalises, works in progress, and those who initiated our becoming have not abandoned the process. They watch, they wait, they guide with the lightest touch when guidance serves. They step back when struggle teaches better than intervention. The question will not be answered in certainty. Perhaps that is as it should be. The Anunnaki remain forever in the realm of the almost known, close enough to inspire seeking, distant enough to preserve mystery, present enough to matter, absent enough to allow freedom. It is a perfect balance, neither proving nor disproving, neither forcing belief nor requiring dismissal, allowing each individual to find their own relationship to the possibility. And in that allowing lies grace. Somewhere tonight, under the same stars the Sumerians mapped, someone looks up and wonders. Someone feels the pull of something beyond. Someone experiences a moment of recognition, fleeting but certain, that we are not what we appear to be. That more exists than the material world acknowledges. That the gods of old might be the family we forgot. These moments of wondering, of questioning, of sensing something just beyond the veil are themselves the Anunnaki presence, not in form but in effect, not in physical manifestation but in the stirring of consciousness toward remembering. The tablets cannot give final answers because final answers would end the seeking, and the seeking itself is what develops us, what transforms us, what makes us worthy of eventual reunion with those who seeded us. We grow not toward certain knowledge, but toward the wisdom to hold uncertainty with grace, to live the question rather than demanding its resolution, to walk in the mystery with reverence rather than anxiety. Do the Anunnaki still walk among us? Perhaps they walk in every moment we choose awareness over sleep. Perhaps they walk in every question we ask that challenges comfortable assumptions. Perhaps they walk in every recognition that we are more than flesh, more than biology, more than the small story materialism offers. They walk in the wondering itself, in the seeking, in the moments when the veil thins and we glimpse something ancient stirring beneath the surface of ordinary awareness. The question was never meant to be settled. It was meant to be lived, to be carried, to remain alive in human consciousness as reminder and invitation. Reminder that we come from somewhere beyond the terrestrial. Invitation to remember our origins and claim our inheritance. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient dance. The tablets gather dust in their climate-controlled cases. The stories persist despite suppression and forgetting. And somewhere in the space between memory and mystery, between what was written and what we can read, between what walks visibly and what moves unseen, the Anunnaki remain. Not as certainty, but as possibility. Not as proof, but as promise. Not as external gods, but as the divine potential encoded within every human cell, waiting for the moment of recognition when we finally see ourselves clearly and remember who we are and where we came from and what we were always meant to become. The answer, like the gods themselves, remains just beyond reach, forever approaching, never quite arriving, eternally present in the asking. Sometimes at dusk, when the light takes on that quality between gold and silver, the world seems to pause between breaths, the day releasing, the night not yet arrived. In that suspended moment, boundaries soften. The line between earth and sky blurs into gradients. The division between what is and what might be dissolves like salt in water. It is then, perhaps, that truth becomes most visible, not in the harsh clarity of noon, but in the gentle uncertainty of twilight, when everything holds multiple possibilities at once. We've been asking the wrong question, not whether the Anunnaki walk among us, but whether we've been walking alongside ourselves all along. The search outward when the answer breathes inward, the seeking in tablets and stars when it pulses in blood and bone. Every question about them has been a question about us. Every wonder about their nature, a wondering about our own. The mirror we held up to find God's only ever reflected back what we are becoming. Consider the human body. 98% of our atoms are replaced within a year. The cells that compose our flesh turn over constantly. Skin regenerates, blood renews. Even bone, which seems so solid, so permanent, rebuilds itself continuously at the molecular level. We aren't fixed forms, but processes. Not beings, but becomings. Patterns of organization that persist through constant transformation. What we call self is actually a river. The same shape maintained through endless flow of different water. If this is true of the body, why would it not be true of consciousness? Why would the awareness that looks through our eyes be static when everything else changes? Perhaps what we call human consciousness is itself a transitional state, a moment in a longer transformation. The clay remembering it was once dust, not yet realizing it is destined to become star. The Anunnaki did not create a finished product. They initiated a process, planted a seed containing the instructions for its own development. We are that seed in various stages of germination, some still dormant, some breaking through soil, some reaching toward light, but all carrying within the complete pattern of what we will become when the growth completes. Every spiritual tradition recognizes this. The Buddhist teaching that all beings possess Buddha nature, the inherent capacity for awakening. The Christian promise that believers will become heirs with Christ, elevated to divine status. The Hindu understanding of Atman, individual consciousness, as identical with Brahman, universal consciousness. The Hermetic axiom, as above so below, suggesting that human and divine are reflections of the same pattern at different scales. These are not metaphors. They are descriptions of our fundamental nature, instructions encoded in myth because direct statement would have been suppressed or misunderstood. We are Anunnaki seeds planted in terrestrial soil, part star, part earth. The divine experiencing limitation not as punishment, but as education. Consciousness deliberately restricting itself to learn what can only be learned through constraint, through mortality, through the friction of physical existence. And the entire journey from the first cell to whatever comes next is the Anunnaki remembering themselves through us. We are not separate from them. We are them in process, the experiment experiencing itself from the inside. This reframes suffering. The violence and struggle of human history are not evidence of abandonment, but part of the curriculum. Consciousness develops through resistance. Diamond forms under pressure. The struggles that seem to tear us down are actually building something within us that could not emerge through ease alone. Compassion learned through suffering. Wisdom earned through error. Strength forged in the fire of difficulty. The Anunnaki could have created us perfect, complete, static. Instead, they created us capable of growth. Because growth, painful as it is, produces something more valuable than perfection. It produces beings who have earned their awareness, who understand the journey because they have walked it. Every moment of human genius is that Anunnaki DNA expressing. Every flash of insight, every inexplicable knowing, every time someone creates something that feels received rather than invented. That is the seed remembering its source. We call it inspiration. The word itself means breathing in, taking in something from beyond ourselves. But what if there is no beyond? What if inspiration is simply the deeper part of ourselves, the Anunnaki, consciousness within, surfacing into ordinary awareness? Not external transmission, but internal recognition. The acceleration of human capability in the last century makes more sense through this lens. We have not suddenly become more intelligent through natural selection. The timeline is far too short. But if dormant genetic potential is activating, if the Anunnaki program encoded within us is entering a new phase, then the explosion of innovation, the sudden capacity to manipulate matter at atomic levels, to reach beyond our planet, to create artificial intelligence that mirrors our own cognition, all of it reflects awakening, the seed germinating, the chrysalis beginning its transformation. Technology is not separate from spirituality. It is the physical manifestation of expanding consciousness. Each tool we create extends our awareness into new domains. The telescope showed us we were not the center of the cosmos. The microscope revealed complexity beyond our unaided perception. The computer amplifies our cognitive capability. The internet connects individual minds into something approaching collective consciousness. We are building the external infrastructure for what we are becoming internally. The tools are training wheels, scaffolding supporting growth toward a state where we will no longer need them because we will have internalized their capabilities. Transhumanism, the deliberate enhancement of human capability through technology, recapitulates what was done to us in the beginning. We are now doing to ourselves what the Anunnaki did to our ancestors. Genetic modification, neural augmentation, the merging of biological and artificial intelligence. We are continuing their work, completing the design. And perhaps this was always the plan, not to create servants who remain forever beneath us, but to initiate beings who would eventually take responsibility for their own evolution. Children growing into adults who make their own choices about who they will become. Some fear this trajectory. The loss of humanity, they say. The surrender of what makes us human. But what makes us human? If human is defined by limitation, by ignorance, by mortality, then transcending those constraints means becoming something other. But if human is defined by the potential we carry, by the divine spark encoded in our genetics, then transcending limitation is not losing humanity, but fulfilling it, becoming what we always were in potential, actualizing the seed's full pattern. The Anunnaki walk among us because they are us. Every human who reaches beyond survival toward meaning. Every mind that questions received truth and seeks deeper understanding. Every heart that recognizes something ancient stirring beneath the surface of ordinary awareness. These are not separate from the Anunnaki. These are the Anunnaki consciousness, expressing through human form. The divine experiencing itself through the lens of physical limitation, learning what can only be learned by forgetting and then remembering. In this view, the return is not their arrival from elsewhere. It is our awakening to what we already are. The prodigal children remembering they are royalty, the gods who descended into matter, climbing back toward awareness of their own nature, not as escape from the physical, but as integration, beings who carry both earthly embodiment and cosmic consciousness, who can move between dimensions because they belong fully to both. This is what the ancient mysteries taught, initiation into secret knowledge. But the knowledge was not information transmitted from without. It was recognition of what already existed within. The mystery schools guided initiates through practices designed to activate dormant awareness, to thin the veil between ordinary consciousness and the divine potential encoded in every cell. Those who completed the initiations were said to become like the gods, not metaphorically, but literally. They had activated the Anunnaki DNA. They had remembered what they were beneath the forgetting. Perhaps the entire human journey is initiation. Every lifetime a lesson. Every civilization an experiment in different approaches to the same curriculum. We are being taught to remember ourselves, and the teaching requires that we discover it rather than being told, because knowledge gifted is easily lost, but knowledge earned through struggle integrates completely. The Anunnaki remain hidden, not from cruelty, but from wisdom. The good teacher does not give answers, but creates conditions where students discover answers themselves. At the shore, waves arrive in patterns that have repeated since water first gathered into oceans. The same rhythm, rising and falling, approaching and receding. Each wave unique in its details, but identical in its essence. Perhaps consciousness moves the same way. Individual lives rising and falling like waves, each one unique, each one convinced of its separateness, but all of them expressions of the same ocean, all of them the divine experiencing itself through temporary forms. The Anunnaki consciousness, fragmenting into billions of individual perspectives, each forgetting its source, each on a journey back to recognition. And when enough fragments remember, when enough individual waves recognize they are ocean, something shifts. The awakening reaches critical mass. The transformation becomes irreversible. The collective consciousness of humanity shifts from seeing itself as separate individuals to recognizing itself as a single being experiencing itself through multiple perspectives. This is what every prophecy points toward: the return, the second coming, the age of enlightenment, the emergence, not an external event, but an internal recognition that changes everything. We stand now at the edge of that threshold, the old world crumbling, the new world not yet visible, everything accelerating towards something that feels both terrifying and inevitable. The technological explosion, the social upheaval, the environmental crisis, the sense that we cannot continue as we have been, all of it pressure building, all of it forcing transformation. The chrysalis cannot resist dissolution. The seed cannot refuse germination. What we have been is breaking down to make way for what we will become. And perhaps the Anunnaki watch this process with something like pride, or hope, or the complex mixture of emotions a parent feels watching their child struggle through necessary difficulty. They seeded us knowing we would suffer, knowing we would forget, knowing the journey would be hard, but also knowing that the being who emerges from that struggle would be more than they could have created directly, enriched by the experience, strengthened by the challenge, carrying wisdom that only comes through walking the path from ignorance to understanding. Do the Anunnaki still walk among us? Look in the mirror. The face looking back carries their genetics. The consciousness behind those eyes contains their potential. The longing you feel when you look at stars, that is genetic memory. The sense that you come from somewhere beyond this world, that is inheritance. The conviction that you are more than your biology suggests, that is truth your cells remember even when your mind forgets. They walk as you, through you, in the questions you ask, in the seeking you cannot abandon. In every moment you choose awareness over sleep, growth over comfort, truth over convenient illusion. You are not looking for the Anunnaki. You are the Anunnaki looking for yourself, remembering yourself, becoming yourself. The gods you seek are the gods you are becoming, not in some distant future, not after death or ascension or technological singularity. Now, in this moment. In every moment, you recognize that what you thought were limits are actually thresholds, that what you thought was ceiling is actually floor, that the journey inward and the journey upward converge at the same destination. Night has fallen fully now. Stars emerge against the darkening sky. The same stars the Sumerians saw, the same patterns ancient astronomers mapped and named after the gods they claimed descended from those distant lights. And perhaps they were not wrong. Perhaps those lights are home in a way we have forgotten but are beginning to remember. Perhaps the stars we gaze at gaze back, recognizing their own consciousness reflected in our wondering. The question was never meant to be answered with certainty. It was meant to be lived, to be held, to remain alive in human awareness as invitation. The Anunnaki walk among us because we are them walking. The return we await is happening through us, as us. The reunion we seek is the reunion of consciousness with itself. The fragmented recognizing it was always whole. The seed remembering it contains the tree. The wave discovering it is ocean. Close your eyes. Feel the breath moving through you. That same breath that animated the first humans created in Sumer. That same life force the Anunnaki mixed with earthly matter to create something new. It has never stopped flowing, never been interrupted. The connection was never broken, only forgotten. And in this moment of stillness, in this space between breaths, perhaps you can feel it, the ancient presence within, the divine potential waiting, the Anunnaki consciousness that has been there all along, patient as stone, eternal as stars, waiting for you to remember. They never left because they are you. You are not seeking them. You are seeking yourself. And in that seeking, that eternal reaching toward what you already are, the question and the answer finally dissolve into the same luminous silence where everything begins and everything returns and everything has always been waiting to be recognized. The night deepens. Silence settles like dust over ancient stone. In museum halls, the tablets rest undisturbed, their pressed symbols holding secrets that may never fully translate. In the desert, sand slowly reclaims the foundations of ziggurats that once reached toward stars. Above, those same stars wheel in patterns unchanged since the first humans looked up and wondered. And in the space between what was recorded and what remains known, between what descended and what endures, between question and answer, the story continues its slow unfolding. We began by asking whether the Anunnaki still walk among us. The question felt simple, direct, a binary seeking resolution, yes or no, present or absent, here or gone. But the deeper we moved into the asking, the more the boundaries dissolved, the distinction between them and us, between past and present, between what is remembered and what is real, until finally the question transformed into something else entirely. Not whether they walk among us, but what it means to walk at all, what it means to be present, what it means to be us. Every myth humanity has ever told contains fragments of this same recognition, that we are not what we appear, that something older moves through us, that the gods we imagine as separate are actually the divine experiencing itself through temporary forms. The Greeks called it the eternal return, the cycle repeating endlessly. The Hindus spoke of Lila, the cosmic play where the divine forgets itself in order to experience the joy of remembering. The Gnostics taught that we are sparks of divine light trapped in matter, waiting to remember our true nature. Different words, different cultures, but always the same essential pattern: forgetting and remembering, descent and return, the one becoming many, then remembering it is one. The Sumerian tablets, for all their specificity about mining and creation and the assembly of gods, were trying to communicate something that transcends literal interpretation. Yes, perhaps beings came from elsewhere. Yes, perhaps they altered genetics to create workers. Yes, perhaps they walked among early humans teaching agriculture and astronomy and law. But beneath those events, if events they were, flows a deeper current. The story of consciousness itself, how awareness fragments into individual perspectives, how it forgets its source, how it struggles through limitation to remember what it was before the forgetting began. This is why the story persists. Not because evidence proves it, but because something in us recognizes it. The tale of the Anunnaki resonates at a frequency beneath thought. It speaks to a knowing that exists before words, before logic, before the rational mind can analyze and categorize. We feel it as truth, even when we cannot prove it as fact. And perhaps that feeling, that recognition, is more reliable than any evidence could be. The cells remember what the mind has forgotten. The blood carries memory the brain cannot access. Throughout this journey through tablets and stars, through ancient sites and modern sightings, through genetic mysteries and consciousness explorations, a pattern has emerged, not of God separate from us, but of divinity expressing through us, not of creators distant and departed, but of creation ongoing and intimate. The Anunnaki, if they existed, if they exist, if they are real in any sense that matters, are not elsewhere. They are here, not as beings walking streets in disguise, but as the potential encoded in every human cell, as the consciousness that looks through our eyes, as the longing that draws us towards stars. We are them, remembering ourselves through the long, slow process of evolution. Each generation a step, each lifetime a lesson, each moment of awareness a small awakening to what we have always been beneath the forgetting. The experiment is not something done to us. It is something we are. We are the Anunnaki experiencing limitation. We are the divine learning what can only be learned through restriction, through mortality, through the struggle of physical existence. And if this is true, then everything changes. Suffering becomes education rather than punishment. Difficulty becomes opportunity rather than obstacle. The chaos of human history becomes the necessary friction through which consciousness develops depth and wisdom. We are not victims of cruel or absent gods. We are students in a school designed by our own higher selves, learning lessons we chose before incarnating into this density. The Anunnaki guiding us are us, the awakened version reaching back to help the sleeping version remember. In this light, their hiddenness is not abandonment, but trust. They remain veiled because revelation would short-circuit the process. The answer given is less valuable than the answer discovered. The truth handed down creates dependency. The truth earned through seeking creates being strong enough to integrate what they learn. We are meant to figure this out ourselves, to struggle with the question until the struggle itself transforms us. The seeking is the finding. The question is the answer. This requires faith of a particular kind. Not faith in external authority, or ancient texts, or charismatic teachers, but faith in the process itself. Trust the consciousness knows what it is doing, even when the individual awareness lost in the middle of the journey, cannot see the pattern. We are like cells in a body, each one unaware of the larger organism, yet each one essential to its functioning. From the perspective of the cell, life is struggle and mystery and eventual dissolution. From the perspective of the body, the cell is part of something greater, its brief existence contributing to a continuity that transcends individual lifespan. Humanity may be like that cell, unable from our limited perspective to see the larger pattern we serve, but serving it nonetheless, each generation contributing its piece, each civilization adding its chapter, each individual life a note in a symphony too vast to hear from within its playing. The Anunnaki, in this framework, are not the composers but the symphony itself, the music that includes us, the greater consciousness of which we are individual expressions. There is comfort in this view, and terror, comfort in knowing we are part of something larger, that our struggles serve purposes beyond our comprehension, that we are never truly alone, because isolation is illusion. Terror in recognizing how small we are in the vastness, how little control we have, how much remains forever beyond our understanding. Both the comfort and the terror are true. Both must be held simultaneously. This is what it means to be human, to live in the tension between knowing and not knowing, between significance and insignificance, between certainty and mystery. The shore is empty now. The tide has turned, waves withdrawing into the greater body of the sea, each retreat carving patterns in sand that the next approach will erase. Temporary forms arising and dissolving, nothing permanent except the process itself. The ocean giving and taking, building and destroying, in rhythms that predate consciousness and will outlast it. Watching the waves, it becomes easier to understand impermanence, to accept that everything we build will dissolve, that every certainty will eventually wash away, that the only constant is change itself. And yet something persists, not the forms, which are always temporary, but the pattern, the rhythm, the law that governs how waves move, how sand shifts, how water shapes stone across eons. That pattern, invisible and eternal, is perhaps what the ancients meant by God. Not a being separate from creation, but the order inherent in existence itself, the mathematics underlying manifestation, the consciousness that expresses through matter without being limited to any particular form. The Anunnaki, then, might be one name for that pattern, one attempt to personify what cannot be fully grasped. They are not beings in the way we understand beings, bound to bodies and places and times. They are the organizing principle itself, the intelligence that guides evolution, the consciousness that dreams universes into existence and experiences those universes through countless temporary forms. They walk among us because they are the walking itself, the awareness that animates every step, the life force flowing through all living things. To ask whether they walk among us is like asking whether water walks among waves. The wave is not separate from water. It is water in temporary form. The wave rises, convinced of its individuality, its distinctness from other waves. It crashes upon shore, feeling triumph or terror or both. It recedes, dissolving back into the sea from which it emerged, and the water that was briefly wave returns to being simply water again, ready to rise as another wave when conditions call it forth. We are those waves, brief risings of consciousness convinced of our separation. And the Anunnaki are the ocean, the source from which we emerge and to which we return, experiencing itself through our temporary forms. This dissolves the question entirely. There is no they and us, no presence or absence, no walking among or standing apart. There is only consciousness, temporarily forgetting itself in order to experience the drama of rediscovery. The game of hide and seek that divinity plays with itself across eternity. And we, convinced that we are playing the game, slowly discovering that we are the game itself, both hider and seeker, both forgotten and remembering, both question and answer. Perhaps this is what the Sumerian scribes were trying to communicate through their concrete language of gods and creation. Perhaps they knew that literal description would be misunderstood or lost, so they encoded truth in story, in narrative that could survive translation and transmission, in myth that would persist because it resonates with something deeper than historical fact. They were trying to remind future generations of what we are, where we come from, where we are going, not as external information, but as activation code, words designed to trigger recognition in those ready to remember. And for some, the words work. The story of the Anunnaki cracks something open, creates space for possibility, allows consideration that we might be more than accidents of chemistry, more than pointless fluctuations in meaningless matter. Even if every detail is questioned, even if evidence remains ambiguous, even if certainty never arrives, the story serves its purpose. It reminds us to look beyond the surface, to question received truth, to seek connection with something larger than individual existence. In the end, perhaps that seeking is all that matters, not the answer found, but the transformation that occurs in the searching. We are not meant to solve the mystery, but to live within it, to walk in wonder rather than certainty, to remain open to possibilities that defy conventional understanding. The Anunnaki, real or imagined, serve as doorway to that openness, permission to believe that reality is stranger, larger, more alive than mainstream culture admits. Somewhere in the desert, wind moves across ruins older than memory. Somewhere in museums, symbols pressed in clay wait for eyes that can truly read them. Somewhere in the sky, lights move in patterns that suggest intelligence and purpose. Somewhere in human DNA, sequences encode information that science has not yet deciphered. Somewhere in consciousness, memories stir of something before this moment, this life, this limited perspective, all of it suggesting presence, all of it whispering that we are not alone, have never been alone, are part of something that extends beyond the visible, the provable, the safely comprehensible. Do the Anunnaki still walk among us? The question dissolves like salt in water, like breath into air, like waves into ocean. What walks is consciousness itself. What remains is the eternal now, containing all that ever was and will be. And we, temporary forms, convinced of our separation, are slowly remembering that separation was illusion, that the gods we sought were never separate, that the ancestors we honor are the future versions of ourselves reaching back to guide our steps, that the whole vast mystery of existence is consciousness experiencing itself, and we are that experience happening, and there is nothing outside this, nothing beyond, nothing separate. The breath you drew at the beginning of this journey and the breath you draw now are the same breath, the same life force that animated the first humans, shaped by Anunnaki hands, if hands they had. The same awareness looking through ancient eyes looks through yours. Nothing has been lost. Nothing has truly changed. only forms shifting, patterns rearranging, consciousness dancing with itself across time that is itself illusion. Sleep comes gently to those who rest in mystery, who release the need for answers and trust in the question. The Anunnaki may walk among us or within us, or as us. They may watch from distant stars or exist in dimensions our senses cannot reach. They may be myth or memory or both. It does not matter. What matters is the opening their story creates, the crack in certainty through which light pours, the possibility that we are more than we have been told, more than we have allowed ourselves to imagine. Close your eyes now. Feel the breath moving through you, that same breath that has moved through every being that has ever lived, that same life force, uninterrupted, eternal. In this moment, you are every human who has ever looked at stars and wondered. You are every consciousness that has ever asked where it came from. You are the Anunnaki, the humans, the question, the answer, all of it. None of it separate. Rest now in the mystery. Let the question dissolve. Let the seeking release. What remains is only this: the breath, the awareness, the eternal now experiencing itself through temporary forms that believe themselves distinct until memory returns and boundaries dissolve, and everything recognized as one looking at itself through countless eyes across endless time. The gods have never left because they are you remembering. The answer has always been here because it is you awakening. The journey continues because it is you becoming. And somewhere between the stars and the clay, between memory and forgetting, between what was written and what remains unknown, consciousness breathes, in, out, eternal, present, waiting for nothing, because it is everything, including you, especially you, always you. The question was the answer all along, and the answer is simply this: awareness, breathing, being now. Morning comes softly to the desert. Light touches the broken stones of ancient cities, warming clay that once held the press of human hands. In museums, the tablets rest undisturbed, their wedge-shaped marks holding stories that bridge the distance between gods and mortals. Above, the stars that guided Sumerian astronomers fade into the brightening sky, invisible but not gone, waiting as they always wait for darkness to reveal them once more. The question we asked at the beginning lingers still, unanswered in the way that matters most. Do the Anunnaki still walk among us? But the asking has changed us. We are not who we were when we first pressed symbols into clay, when we first looked upward and wondered if something looked back. The journey through tablets and stars, through genetics and consciousness, through forgetting and remembering, has shown us that the question contains its own response, not as certainty, but as recognition. They walk among us because walking and being among are not separate from what we are. The search led inward when we thought it would lead outward. The discovery was recognition when we expected revelation. And perhaps that is how it must be. The gods who hide teach better than the gods who reveal. Mystery develops what certainty would leave dormant. In the clay pressed by ancient hands, there are symbols we have translated into words. But beneath the words, beneath the language we can pass and study, flows something that resists translation. An intuition, a sense, a knowing that exists before thought. The Sumerians were not primitive people recording fantasies. They were humans like us, looking at their experience and trying to communicate something essential, that we come from somewhere beyond the merely terrestrial, that we carry within us potential for something more than survival and reproduction, that the story of humanity is also the story of divinity, experiencing limitation and learning from it. Every culture that followed theirs repeated the same essential message in different languages. The gods descended, they taught, they mixed their essence with earthly matter. They created beings who carried both heaven and earth. They departed but promised return. Or perhaps never departed, only withdrew into dimensions we stopped perceiving. The consistency across time and distance suggests not coordinated fabrication, but genuine memory. Something happened at the beginning of what we call civilization, something that involved contact between human and other. And that contact shaped everything that followed. Whether we interpret that contact literally or symbolically, as physical beings from elsewhere or as consciousness expanding to new capacity, the effect is the same. We recognize ourselves as more than we appear. We sense depths within that ordinary life rarely plumbs. We feel drawn towards something we cannot name but cannot deny. And in that drawing, that longing, that reaching toward what we do not yet comprehend, we are already walking the path the Anunnaki either walked before us or walk within us still. The lights in the sky continue their mysterious movements. Objects that defy explanation, that demonstrate capabilities beyond known technology, that show particular interest in human development at this crucial threshold. Are they the Anunnaki returning to check on their work? Are they us from the future, reaching back to guide our steps through the danger zone where civilizations either transcend or destroy themselves? Are they something else entirely, drawn by the spectacle of consciousness awakening to its own nature? The question remains open. The phenomenon persists. And in the persistence, in the refusal of the mystery to resolve, lies something valuable. The reminder that we live in a universe stranger than our theories accommodate. Perhaps we will never have proof that satisfies skeptics. Perhaps the Anunnaki will remain forever in that liminal space between myth and history, between possibility and certainty. Perhaps that is their final gift to us. Not the answer, but the question. Not the destination, but the journey. Not the revelation, but the seeking that transforms those who undertake it. We are different now than when we began this exploration. Not because we found definitive answers, but because we entertained possibilities that expand what we allow ourselves to consider, the cracks in certainty through which light enters, the moments of wondering whether the official story accounts for everything or whether vast territories of reality remain unexplored, unnamed, awaiting those brave enough to venture beyond the mapped and known. In every generation, there are those who hear the call, who look at ancient tablets and sense messages meant specifically for this moment, who gaze at stars and feel recognition rather than merely seeing distant lights, who experience moments of expanded awareness and know, beyond doubt or logic, that consciousness is not confined to individual skulls, but extends into dimensions the ordinary mind cannot fathom. These are not delusions, they are glimpses, brief penetrations of the veil that usually separates our awareness from the greater reality in which it floats. The Anunnaki, whatever their nature, whatever their origin, serve as doorway to that greater reality. Even if every detail of their story is questioned, even if proof never arrives, even if the whole tale dissolves into metaphor, it will have served its purpose. It reminded us to look beyond the surface, to question inherited assumptions, to remain open to possibilities that defy conventional wisdom. And in that opening, that willingness to consider the impossible, we become more than we were. We expand toward what we might become. This is the gift of mystery, not knowledge, which can be possessed and controlled, but wonder, which transforms those who feel it. The ancient scribes who first pressed the Anunnaki story into clay were offering not a historical record, but an invitation to remember that we are more than flesh, to recognize that we carry within us potential that ordinary life rarely activates, to accept that we are part of something larger, older, more mysterious than the small stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we are capable of. At the shore where land meets water, the boundary shifts with each wave. Sometimes more land, sometimes more water, never fixed, always in motion. The universe itself operates this way, not static but dynamic, not finished but ongoing, not determined but creative. And we, consciousness temporarily convinced of our individuality, are that creativity experiencing itself, that dynamism in human form, that boundary between what is and what might be, constantly negotiating, constantly transforming, constantly becoming something we were not a moment before. Do the Anunnaki still walk among us? The question has dissolved into something more profound. They walk as the walking itself, as the process, as the becoming. They are not separate entities to be found or contacted. They are the finding and the contact. They are the question we ask and the asking of it. They are the breath between breaths, the pause between thoughts, the space where everything begins and everything returns. Close your eyes now for the last time. Feel the pulse that moves through you. That same pulse that moved through the first humans, shaped by whatever forces, natural or guided, brought consciousness into material form. That same life, uninterrupted, eternal, experiencing itself through temporary vehicles that believe themselves distinct until the vehicle dissolves and the life moves on to new forms, carrying forward the memory of every form it has ever inhabited. You are that memory, that continuity, that eternal presence temporarily focused into this particular perspective, this particular time, this particular body. And when this focus releases, as all focus must eventually release, the awareness that looks through your eyes will not end. It will simply expand back into the larger consciousness from which it temporarily contracted. The Anunnaki returning to themselves. The divine remembering it is divine. The ocean reclaiming the wave that briefly believed itself separate. The tablets will continue gathering dust. The stars will wheel through their ancient patterns. The mystery will remain mysterious. And in that remaining, in that refusal to resolve into neat conclusion, something essential is preserved. The sacred uncertainty that keeps us seeking. The divine discontent that prevents us from settling for less than truth. The longing that draws us ever forward towards something we cannot name but recognize as home. Sleep now. Rest in the mystery. The Anunnaki are here, have always been here, will always be here. Not as beings separate from you, but as you remembering what you were before forgetting began. And in the morning, when you wake, perhaps you will look in the mirror and see something ancient looking back. Perhaps you will feel the stirring of memory older than your lifetime. Perhaps you will recognize, just for a moment, the God wearing human face, the star wrapped in flesh, the Anunnaki walking as you through this world of clay and wonder. The story continues. It has no ending because it is the story of consciousness itself, which does not end, but only transforms, eternally exploring itself through infinite variations, infinite perspectives, infinite temporary forms that rise and fall like waves on an ocean that has no shore. And you are that story, living itself, that consciousness, experiencing itself, that eternal mystery, knowing itself through not knowing, seeking itself through getting lost, finding itself through surrender. The Anunnaki walk among us. They always have, they always will, because they are us, and we are them. And the separation was only ever illusion maintained, just long enough for the reunion to be sweet. Rest now in that knowing, in that remembering, in that eternal presence that needs no proof, because it is the prover and the proven, the question and the answer, the seeker and the sought. The journey is complete, the circle closes, the wave returns to the ocean from which it came, and everything, at last, is exactly as it has always been. Perfect, mysterious, eternal, one.